Today's topic is atonement. We sing about it in both our traditional hymns, Blessed Assurance, and the whole third verse of How Great Thou Art. And for this one, more than any of the doctrines, I feel like I really need to be on my toes. I feel like I really need to be very careful about what I'm going to say. I guess that's because it seems that Christians hold their understandings of atonement more closely, more dearly, and more fiercely than other doctrines. For someone to say, Jesus died to save me from my sins, is a very serious statement. And just how someone understands that seems to be something that we can get very defensive about. Upon reflecting, I'm wondering if that's because the whole concept of the atonement is just so beyond us that maybe we Christians all know that this belief is fragile because we don't completely understand it. And if that reflection is offensive to you in any way, because you absolutely do completely understand the atonement perfectly, please, I mean no offense to you. But I do admit that I approached today's sermon with an agenda of trying to change your mind. Today, part of my hope is to help us see that maybe the atonement is harder for us to understand than we think. I'll present various ways of understanding and saying with faith, Jesus Christ died to save me from my sin. My hope is you will even hear your own understanding and faith, but I also hope you see that there are many other ways to understand how Jesus' death creates our forgiveness. I hope you see that these other ways make logical sense, and that these understandings help many people draw closer to God, and that each theory has its limits, and trying to meld them is hard, as some stand in stark contrast. So by seeing these multiple, logical, life-giving conceptions of the atonement, I hope you will be humbled by the God we speak about today. A God that is far beyond us. I can't think of any idea that binds Christians together like the shared belief that Jesus died to save us from our sins. But my caveat is that the theories of atonement are so many and so nuanced, they teach a whole class at seminary just on this topic. So there's no way I can be completely comprehensive, and I'm going to do my best. So with that very lengthy intro, I jump in. Now, when a non-Christian hears the phrase, Jesus died to save people from their sins, the common response is to think of God as pretty gruesome, to require death, to send a son to die. So I'm going to start with the atonement theory of Jesus being the sacrifice for our sins. Now, this is only one of 4 theories I'll explain, and it itself has several variations. The most common explanation for the sacrificial concept of atonement is penal substitution. This theory emphasizes that God is lawful. We cannot deny that humans are sinful. We deserve punishment for our sin if God is truly lawful. However, if the punishment really fit the crime, well, for each one of us, we fall so short of God's hopes and dreams and intentions. For each one of us, we fall so short that our crime would dictate a punishment none of us could withstand. Our warranted punishments would destroy us. So, to stand in our place, a substitute for us. The lawful God sent someone to obediently receive the punishment we deserve. Someone who, because of his divinity, could withstand that punishment. Now, some of you may be wincing at how mean this makes God look. But let's think about the consequences of denying the legal nature of God. Like I mentioned last week, in the face of terrible, senseless evil, like Hitler's concentration camps, can you deny that you want a lawful God? Don't you want your God to be judged in the sense that God will provide proper punishment to Adolf Hitler? Don't you want a God who gets angry at the injustices of the world, children going hungry and denied health care because of corporate greed? Don't you want a fair and righteous and just God? But God is still merciful not to take it out on us. These are the strengths of the substitutionary theory of atonement. The just God that still holds that little bit of mercy to reserve the punishment for his only Son, sent because he could withstand the punishment. Now, the weakness of this theory is that it really seems to question the power of God. Couldn't God have chosen another way? And this theory flat out offends some by not giving enough due to the loving and merciful aspects of God. Why require such a painful death? Now, not surprisingly, other theories address these downfalls. The Christus Victor theory of atonement completely emphasizes the power of God and really doesn't say much at all about the lawful just God. In the Christus Victor understanding, Jesus saves us from our sins by liberating us from all things that hold us in bondage. This theory thinks of humanity as very, very little, emphasizing our smallness compared to our sinfulness, emphasized in the substitutionary theory. In this theory, humanity is vulnerable. We are victims. We are in the grip of sin, not so much guilty perpetrators. We are stuck, and we need to be liberated. Now, there are variations within the Christus Victor theory about exactly how Jesus liberates us, but they all focus on the idea that Jesus defeats sin through the interaction with Satan during the 3 days in the tomb. Jesus had to go down the gate to do battle with Satan, so that we can now be free to live a life not completely bound in sin. In this theory, Easter can be seen as the turning point in the war. The enemy hasn't surrendered yet, like at Gettysburg, so we still get trapped from time to time. But the enemy has lost the war and just doesn't know it yet. This God appears more loving. It's not that someone was required to die so as to suffer because someone had to suffer. Instead, it was required to send a divine human down into the underworld to do battle with Satan to save us. This God also sounds much more powerful. God is working outside of the box to send something new to a place none of us can go to, and then bring it back to us. That sounds very powerful. Now, a drawback of the Christus Victor atonement theory is its view of humanity. In this theory, God and Jesus are so powerful, and we humans don't play much of a role, because really we can't. We're small victims who are all trapped. And I'm not sure it emphasizes the loving God that so wishes to be in relationship with us. In this period, God came down to earth for us to take on human form, to really, truly, firsthand understand our pains and our sufferings, even to the point of death. In this period, Jesus comes down to earth so that God is subjected to human life's problems in order to establish a bond of solidarity and love. For example, I can pray for all of your pains, but no one understands them like you, and no one's heart breaks more about them than your parents. This is an ultimately loving God. We are saved because God knows our pains, and we know that God shares them with us. We are saved from carrying the burden ourselves. Sharing the pain makes it bearable through God's solidarity, formed in the relationship between Jesus and God. Furthermore, we are saved through God's love to offer better love to others. Has anyone ever experienced this? That through God's forgiving and merciful love to you, you are better able to love the people in your own life. Your actions are transformed, and you are saved from further sinful actions because God's love for you inspires you so much to reach out in love to others. The drawback of the